Good evening and welcome to the Mojo Story. My name is Barkha Dutt and you're watching our independent digital platform that does a deep dive every day on the issues that really matter and often do not find space on mainstream media. On the program today, as we reported first here on this platform, the Supreme Court is disappointed with the way that the government is handling the farmers' protest. The Chief Justice today has made it extremely clear that it wants the government to put a stay on the implementation of the new farm laws. The pictures that you're seeing are from the farmers' protest that continues. So far, it is not clear that even after the Supreme Court intervention, which is now moving towards setting up an expert panel that will review and possibly amend these laws, will the farmers step back or will they settle for nothing less than an absolute repeal of the laws? For now, what we do know is that the Chief Justice has commented on the fact that nothing is improved, that women, children, and the elderly are at these protests in bitter cold, and they're talking about how these laws, good or bad, need to be paused before an expert panel is able to look at them. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be asking the fundamental question: is this now a face saver for the government? What the government perhaps didn't want to be seen to be doing, the court, with this intervention, may be providing an exit route. Will the government and the farmers both take it? What does it also do for the division of roles classically in a democracy between the executive and the judiciary? Let me introduce our panel, a very distinguished panel, one by one on the program today. We're joined, as you can see on your screen, by Gurcharan Das. Gurcharan Das is, of course, a commentator and author, has been part of corporate India for many, many years, and has in fact called these farm laws a possible 1991 moment. So I'm wondering what he'll say today after the Supreme Court intervention. We're joined by Indira Jaising, one of the country's best-known legal luminaries, who's also served as a law officer in previous governments. Welcome to the program, Indira. We have Radhika Ramasheshan, senior journalist, commentator, has been following these protests very, very closely. We have Bhuvan Bagga, who's went on Twitter today to say that whether the laws are good or bad, why is the Supreme Court getting involved in matters of policy? So we'll pick up that thought from him. And we're also joined by Avik Saha. Avik Saha, of course, is the national convener of the Jai Kisan Andolan and also works with the Swarajya Party, the party spearheaded by Yogendra Yadav and Prashant Bhushan. So welcome everybody to the program. And I'll start with you, Gurcharan, if I may. Obviously, for someone like you who has backed the laws, this is a matter of some disappointment. But on the other hand, it may actually create a much needed middle ground where this expert panel is able to absorb some of the changes that could provide a way for these laws to move forward, but not in their present form. Because let's be very clear, the Supreme Court has asked for a pause. It's not asked for a scrapping. It's not immediately clear to me whether the farmers' unions will accept this, and we'll ask Avik that. But what do you make of what has come from the Supreme Court today, Gurcharan?
Well, I'm ambivalent, because one hand, I am happy that the Supreme Court has shown an independent mind, and it is democracy in action, like the protests. So as a Democrat, I'm happy. But as an economist and reformer, I'm obviously sad. And I'm sad still that government didn't present its case better. And this has been at the root of the problem, as I've mentioned from the beginning, that if Mr. Modi and his cabinet had sold the laws in advance, we wouldn't be where we are. And what I'm really worried about and saddest about is that whether after this, the government will lose its appetite for reform, and further very important reforms that need to be done may not be done. And so, I mean, as I said, this really is our 1991 moment in agriculture. And you are also right that this may provide that pause. As long as the committee doesn't take as long as it did to arrive at the Ayodhya verdict or other verdicts, I hope if they do it reasonably expeditiously, it may actually be the best way to proceed. As you know, I felt that the good middle ground was the two-track idea, which is that let Punjab and Haryana go in the way they are, and we can pause the reforms there, do them in other states, because it's a state subject. Other states can go ahead and do them, and Punjab, Haryana see the benefits that farmers in other states are getting. They too will join the bandwagon, as it were.
Okay, so as a Democrat, Gurcharan, what you're saying is that you are happy that the democratic process is working, that there is space for dissent, the court has taken cognizance of it, the farmers' protests have therefore worked. But as someone who supports the farm laws, you worry that this is going to stop the government from moving on reform the next time around. Right? Gurcharan, is that a fair summary?
That's right. I'm not. Yeah, I think so. I think my worry is that there is a long agenda for reforms in our country if we're going to realize our future. And I just hope they don't lose the appetite for further reform as a result of these protests.
Okay, let me bring in Indira right now. I do want a sense of what the farmers' unions might say, and I'll come to Avik in just a moment from now. But Indira, in terms of what the Supreme Court has decided to do, it's a very unusual thing because typically we would not want the court to be intervening in matters of parliamentary law. This is a law that has been passed by Parliament, whether you agree with it or not. The court itself seems somewhat uncomfortable. In fact, the Chief Justice remarked that they were not, they were not happy about the fact that they're having to do this, but they were very clear, if the center does not stay the laws, the court will. It's also very clear that we're going to have an expert panel that is going to come up. In terms of the debate around whether India is becoming a judicial democracy as opposed to a parliamentary democracy, this is going to strengthen those who say that the court gets involved in matters of policy. As a senior lawyer, what do you say, Indira?
Yeah. It's an important question that you've raised, but I would like to make my understanding of what's going on in court clear over here. I think the court really is focusing on processual justice. A question that was asked to the Attorney General was, what were the consultations that preceded the mark the word preceded, the introduction of these laws? The question was not, what are you doing now with them? That question was also there. But the important question that came up in today's hearing was, what did you consult with the states preceding the introduction of these laws in Parliament? Because the suggestion seemed to be, if you had had a proper dialogue in the true sense of the word, in the true sense of democracy, perhaps you wouldn't see the situation that you see today. So I'm very clear in my mind, the court will not get into the policy behind these laws. Even when the petitions are taken up for decision on merits, what the court will be looking at is, does the center has the legislative competence to enact these laws? Are the states who are protesting these laws right when they say agriculture is within our remit? And that only the court can give an answer, yes or no. We can give in our opinions. And I must say, very frankly, in my own opinion, the center doesn't have the legislative competence, right? But ultimately, the court is going to have to decide this question. They are not going to decide on the substance of the farm laws. It's essentially a political issue. And that is the significance of protests.
So may I just jump in there to understand what you're saying? You're saying the legal question is, since this is a state subject, the states should be left to decide for themselves. So that's the legal question the Supreme Court can get involved in. For the rest, it's not getting involved in the laws per se. But when it mandates a committee, Indira, to take another look at the laws, is it not getting involved in the policy space?
Okay, 1 second. Before I move to an answer to your question, there's another very important legal question, which I will just put on the table for you. And that is, there are states which have enacted their own laws. Punjab, Chhattisgarh, and Rajasthan being the 3 states. Now, these laws have been stuck with the governor. The governor has neither given assent nor rejected assent, nor forwarded to the president on the ground that these laws are repugnant to the central law. Now, this is plainly unconstitutional, okay? Because this is like playing politics, the center playing politics. And it's a legal issue. It's a purely legal issue. When a state enacts a law, must the governor not give consent to that? To answer your question on the committee, I think the Chief Justice made it clear that anything the committee says is not going to be binding on anybody, neither on the center nor on the court. I think here again the court is focusing on process. And I think the court has made it very clear, A, they uphold the right to protest, provided, of course, that protest is peaceful. Yeah. And I think that is an issue that we could possibly focus on. And that's why I don't want to get into the debate that Gurcharan Das is raising, namely, is it the 1991 movement for agriculture? Some would dispute whether the 1991 movement was valid at all, or whether it has done anything for this country or not done anything for this country. So that's not the debate over here. The debate over here, I have answered your question by saying the court is not exceeding its remit. And if people say that, I think they are misguiding.
So I think that's the operative part, Indra, that you've just said, that the court is not exceeding its remit, and you've explained that. And I want to go to Avik, but Radhika, on the larger politics of this moment, do you believe that the government through this route has got itself a face saver? But it works as a face saver only if the farmers actually accept this, because let's be very clear, the laws are not being scrapped. They're only being held in abeyance.
Absolutely. I mean, just a couple of days ago, after two representatives of the BJP had a 2-hour-long meeting with the Prime Minister, they came out and they said there is no question to double down on these laws. They will stay. In fact, they even went to the extent of saying that we are not going to have any amendments. So if that is the resolve of the government, I don't even see if the government would be open to the idea of setting up an expert panel. If the Supreme Court does set up one, it only buys the government that much more time. And I do not see the government open to amendments, let alone repeal. The laws are here to stay. But Indira raised a very important point about the 3 states that have enacted their own laws. Of course, it's within the jurisdiction of the states to reject the central law and enact their own laws. And, it's not right on the part of the governor to kind of sit on that and not do a thing. I mean, when the states have done nothing unconstitutional, that is the important part. So to answer your question, the center is not going to back down at all. These laws are here to stay. And after this, it's really up to the states to negotiate and navigate the space, the gray space that still exists.
So you're not convinced that the crisis is over or beginning to be over, Radhika?
Far from it. Far from. You saw the protests in Haryana yesterday. I mean, so far we were given to believe that Haryana is peaceful and it's only farmers from Punjab who have infiltrated their counterparts in Haryana. These were Haryana farmers who would not allow Mr. Khattar to hold his panchayat or mahapanchayat or whatever he intended to. So, I mean, both sides are extremely rigid, and I really don't see, Barkha, where a meeting point or how a meeting point is going to evolve.
That's very interesting, because I kind of started feeling like maybe this is providing the face-saver solution that everybody actually needs. And I just want to straight away now bring in Avik into the show. Avik is, of course, representing the Andolan by the farmers on this program. But Avik, before I ask you to answer the question, on this platform, we were interviewing Yogendra Yadav. And this is before the Supreme Court actually came with this intervention. And ironically, Yogendra Yadav was not in favor of the Supreme Court getting involved in this piece, other than, as Indra said, to look at the constitutional question of whether the center could legislate for the states. He believed that Vigyan Bhavan was outsourcing, I'm quoting him, and we're just going to play that little clip before you react. He believed Vigyan Bhavan was outsourcing responsibility to the Supreme Court. So let's just take a listen in to what Mr. Yadav said.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm really hoping that the Supreme Court would reject these utterly frivolous applications, petitions, which ask the farmers to be evicted. So clearly, I think our lawyers, we have Mr. Dushyant Dave, Mr. Prashant Bhushan, Colin Gonsalves, and Sri Fulkaji, a panel of four. I'm sure they would go and ask for dismissal of these frivolous petitions. As for Supreme Court doing mediation, I mean, Barkha, this is an extraordinary suggestion coming from the executive. So here is a government which is holding dialogue with the farmers. And in the middle of the dialogue, it says, well, let the Supreme Court sort it out. Sort out what? Supreme Court can only rule about the constitutionality. So is the government passing on its own responsibility? Is the government saying, while we are holding the dialogue and while we fix the next date on the 15th, but we really don't think we are going to do it, so let someone else do it? What is really happening? Why is the executive so keen to pass on the responsibility to the judiciary when the government itself has said that such matters must not go to the judiciary?
Okay, so I played this out because this is ironic. The Supreme Court has intervened on the side of the farmers. Yogendra Yadav, and Indra, I want you and Gurcharan also to react to this. Arun Kumar, well-known economist, is also joining us. Welcome, Arun. But Avik, you heard what Yogendra said. Yogendra Yadav says, and he said it later in our interview, that on the constitutionality legal principle, the Supreme Court had a stay. He believed that the Supreme Court has no say at all in the policy piece. But now that the court has actually intervened on the side of the farmers, do you still feel the same?
On the side of the farmers is something you want me to react to, I guess. Well, we don't know what the Supreme Court has really ordered. We are having a pre-order discussion. There's nothing on record. The court has not passed an order. We don't know what order will be passed. But from what the discussions were in court today, we can come to only three conclusions. One, the government is reluctant to negotiate and deal with the farmers. Two, the government wants the farmers' protest to end and is hoping that a stay of implementation of the acts will persuade the farmers to disperse. And three, the government cannot, for the sake of its politics and image, give in to the demands of the farmers. These things were clear in the outcome today. Farmers' organizations are meeting as we speak, and there will be discussions throughout the night. There are 500 organizations, multiple views. And we've been told not to really go out and comment on the Supreme Court proceedings till a collective decision is taken. So I just wanted to place that on record. However, the things are not as good as you feel it is. The Supreme Court playing emissary of peace, kindness, and old women and old people not participating in the protests. All this is not going down very well on the ground. I can inform you of that very clearly and loudly. Supreme Court, I agree with Yogendra Yadav, and we've been saying this from yesterday. Decide on law, let government handle policy. If it can't handle policy, let it come before the nation and admit so, and we'll take it up from there.
Okay, so I'm not seeing the optimism in your comments either, particularly when the Chief Justice indicated that women and the elderly and children may be asked to actually leave the site of the protest. The farmers are not happy about that, also pointing out that this is a work in progress. We haven't yet seen the actual order. That order is still awaited. Before I actually take another round from and get Indira and Gurcharan, I just want to get those who haven't spoken, Bhuvan and Arun Kumar. Bhuvan, I'll actually start with you because your tweet did get my attention. You did say this is not the place of the Supreme Court. You heard Indira Jaising explain that very painstakingly, separating the point of the state's rights to jurisdict and legislate from the larger piece. Are you more convinced now?
Which is what I said in the tweet as well. That the Supreme Court, if it comes to constitutionality of a particular law, the way a particular law has been drafted, if the court goes after that or talks about that, that is what it should be doing. But when it comes to policy, talking about an unelected committee or a committee looking into a law which has been approved and passed by a parliament, whether it's a good one or a bad one, that's like very subjective in a democracy. And that is something at the end of the day, voters have to decide, and voters decide that whether a government has done good or a government has done bad. And even in terms of protesters, if farmers are protesting and out on the streets for whatever reasons and in howsoever you may look at it, but ideally it should be the government and the farmers, basically the government and the protesters dealing directly with each other. They should directly dealing with each other, because courts should intervene ultimately if the issue becomes that certain states feel that their rights have been taken away, and not necessarily if the number of protesters are, whether the number of protesters are 5,000 or 50,000 outside the streets, because law cannot really be about numbers. If
Okay.
the number of
Got it. Got it. Let me just bring in Arun Kumar, and then I just want to go around the panel once more. Mr. Kumar, the matter is now with the Supreme Court. And for those of us, well, I seem to be the only solitary person on this program who actually thought this might lead to a resolution. Almost everybody else believes that we are nowhere close to one. Gurcharan and I, we had somewhat optimistic feeling that we may finally be moving along on this. What is your opinion, sir, with the comments we've heard from the court so far?
So, it is a political question, there's no doubt, because policy making depends on, the various political interests that are there. But there has been a logjam. And therefore, I have been suggesting that the Supreme Court could step in and say to the center that please hold the laws in abeyance and have better discussion. And I think Indra is also pointing towards that, the procedure has not been followed, where proper discussion with the various groups did not take place, with the states it did not take place. And therefore I think Supreme Court is only saying, look, the process should be followed. And here I think the point that she's made also about the states having passed laws, that would also come in. The states laws would also therefore be discussed as part of some kind of a mediation that could take place. So I think Supreme Court is only enabling both sides to come to some kind of a discussion, which has stalled, because the center is saying we will not withdraw, we will not do anything, where the farmers are saying, look, we are not going to discuss any changes in the law. We want the laws to be repealed. So I think this is just a via media for the process to begin, so that we can come to some kind of a conclusion.
Okay, so we are actually seeing the government slightly push back to the Supreme Court and saying that the court's observations were far too harsh. I think the point is that the government continues to maintain that the farmers' groups were non-cooperative. The farmers' groups continue to maintain that the last two rounds of talks, Yogendra Yadav said to us, were a charade. The government was not even interested in talking. The Attorney General has said that there is a precedent that the courts cannot stay legislation. So we're back to questioning the space for the court to actually make this intervention. This is a very, very important space, and I want to go back to Indra on it in just a moment. But Gurcharan, I'll start with you because we started this program on a note of your feeling as a Democrat, something good has happened, but almost everybody else on the program seems to believe that this is not enough for movement, this is not enough for resolution, and there are larger questions about what the role of the court is and what the role of the legislature is. Gurcharan.
Well, I certainly feel that it is not the court's domain to legislate policy. However, like you, I'm pragmatic, and I see this as an opportunity to break the logjam. And so the committee that they are planning to set up may well provide the place where discussion can take place, and you can arrive at something that the Supreme Court. I mean, I theoretically and purely, Yogendra Yadav is right. It is, as it were, outsourcing to the judiciary. However, I do feel that since we haven't got anywhere so far, this may provide the breakthrough. And why not? So let's be practical. We want to save, those of us who want to save reforms and feel that a lot of the country, that these are really ultimately beneficial for the farmers, they can also have their way, as well as the farmers can feel been heard in the process. So I am with also, Arun has said basically the same thing.
Yeah, that let the court be a via media. It's not ideal for the separation of roles, but that is the moment that we are now upon. Now, Indra, I'll take it back to you because you're actually insisting that there is no crossing of traditional roles. You're saying the Supreme Court is not exceeding its remit. You're pointing to the fact that states are not actually being allowed to pass through with their own legislatures because the governor is not signing off on them. But you heard what Avik said on behalf of the Jan Kisan Andolan, that this is not enough, and that and it cuts both ways. If the government is saying that the court is exceeding its remit vis-a-vis staying the laws, the farmers' unions might turn around and say the court is exceeding its remit by asking the women and the children and the elderly to leave. So this is a kind of really complicated place we're in, where the Supreme Court may get it, may get it from both sides. When I say get it, I mean may get discontent from both sides. Just unmute yourself and speak, please. I'm not being able to unmute you from my side. Yeah, go ahead.
Barkha, yes, you're right about a few issues, but all of us have missed a very, very important comment that Mr. P.C. Chidambaram made on the previous date of hearing. He is the one who pointed out to the court that when the chips are down, at the end of the day, it's for Parliament to make any changes to this law. And he, in other words, very politely and in a very dignified manner, what he was telling the court is that, look, there's no way you can change this law. The final solution, if I may call it that, is to convene a session of Parliament, okay? And this is what Mr. Chidambaram pointed out to the Chief Justice of India on the last date of hearing. And I think the Chief Justice deeply appreciated this legal proposition. It's a legal proposition. How can a law be changed? A law cannot be changed by a committee which is set up by a court. A law can only be changed by Parliament. And that is why today, and that's the reason why today, we also heard Mr. Dushyant Dave say, well, none of this might have happened if they even now decide to convene a session of Parliament to debate these laws. Because even keeping a law in abeyance, it's a difficult legal issue. Yes, the court can do it. I believe that the court can do it. I believe that the Attorney General is wrong in saying that no law can ever be stayed. Laws have been stayed. There is only a presumption of constitutionality which attaches to a law, but that presumption of constitutionality can be displaced at any point of time, including at an interim point of time. But I think the Chief Justice is very conscious of the fact that he cannot rewrite these laws, and that ultimately this game has to shift to Parliament and to the state legislatures. The rest is up to the protester to decide. The only little comic comment that I would like to make is I did feel like getting up and telling the Chief Justice, look, I'm also a woman, I'm also old, but I love being at protest. Let's not go with these stereotypes that, older women don't want to be at protests or can't be at protests. There I think the chief was wrong. But otherwise, playing a peacemaker, I think, is very different from trying to rewrite a law. And I do think that he has played a statesman-like role in recommending a committee with the clear understanding that the committee cannot bind anybody.
But to this point about the women and the elderly, how is this going to play out? Because you clearly heard you're not happy, and Avik is not happy on behalf of the farmers. How is that going to play out? Indira?
You're asking me.
Yeah,
I think women, young or old, are going to continue to protest. Barkha, let's understand one thing very clearly. It seems to me that what the government is really, really afraid of, and I want to tell you, not once but 5 times they brought up the issue of 26th January. Okay, what is this all about? Was this the real dialogue happening in court, or was it just I want to save my skin on the 26th of January? On the 26th of January, I don't want a hangama happening in Delhi. But so long as you have this attitude, I don't think even peace is anywhere close to the horizon, and we have to just accept the fact that protest is a fundamental right. That's all there is to it. I will only say, and the Chief Justice made it very clear, young, old is not the issue. The issue is no violence. In fact, he referred to Mahatma Gandhi and the Satyagrahis and almost compared these farmers to them. So let's just cling on to our right to protest and let history take care of everything else.
Okay, I think that's passionately said. Arun, briefly from you and then Avik. I know, Avik, you're wanting to come in on the issue of the women and the children and the elderly and the larger point. But Arun, since you've been arguing in favor of the Supreme Court enabling this mediation, there are people who have misgivings about it. And I think Indra is stressing again and again, the Supreme Court is playing peacemaker, not policymaker. We just have to keep underlining that peacemaker, not policymaker. This has to go back to Parliament. Now, personally, as a student of politics, I know once it goes back to Parliament, this government, anything, and Radhika will, I'm sure, back me up on this. This is not a government that's going to take this law back to Parliament and stand down. The only time it ever did that was with the Land Ordinance Act. That is the only one time it did it. So we have to factor in our understanding of politics also when we say take it back to Parliament. Mr. Arun Kumar?
So, the suggestion that the Supreme Court has made is to set up a committee to work out some kind of a compromise. It is not saying that, the law would be what the committee says, but once a compromise is reached, then I think the government would have to redraft the law and then, reenact that law. So it's not as if, the law is going to be drafted by them, but the law as it is drafted by the committee would go to the Parliament, would go to the standing committee, would be also vetted by the states and so on, because everybody would be consulted. That's the whole idea, that if you have wider consultation, you can come to some compromise. At the moment, there's no compromise. The government is not backing down, the farmers are not going to back down. And let me say, the government's idea that you can create free markets by simply allowing the sales outside APMC doesn't work, because free markets are interlinked. The land market, the produce market, and the credit market, they're all interlinked. So you can't just say that I'll free the produce market and everything would become free and the choice would be available. So they're working on the wrong economic assumption. It's a well-established theory that interlinked markets cannot be made free just simply by...
I just want to jump in for another reason, and to Avik and then Radhika and then Bhuvan. When I asked Yogendra Yadav about this expert panel, he said that all the economists who count for anything in India have all expressed their opinions on these farm laws. So, for example, on this program itself, Arun Kumar and Gurcharan Das have a completely different opinion on the farm laws. And Yogendra's point was, where are you going to get this panel of experts who aren't already one or the other side of the debate? So how is this expert panel even going to mediate this going forward? He didn't have much hope from this expert panel. He felt that there weren't enough sort of people who didn't have one or the other very polarizing view. Avik, go ahead, please.
See, we are talking about a committee. The committee can have two functions. One, it can negotiate to disperse the protesting farmers. The other is to find a way on which the government and the farmers can meet. Let's be very, very clear, unambiguous about it. This is about the image of one man. And it's a very important asset to the ruling party. That's at stake. So a committee which will have three representatives, one government, farmers, and some mediating people, will have a person who will have power to override what the Prime Minister of this country has said. Can any of you even imagine such a committee being in existence? So this whole idea of a committee to disperse the farmers will not be accepted by the farmers, and a committee which will work towards repeal, amendment, whatever, of the law cannot happen because the government simply cannot accept it. So the committee idea is a stillborn idea, sounds nice when said in court, but does it actually work? Going forward, any kind of, even if the farmers feel for a moment that this is an attempt to disperse their protest, will not be acceded to. It will be a very sad day. Lots of institutions are crumbling all around us. And I don't want, and as a lawyer, I can tell you this, I don't want the Supreme Court to crumble. I think it should tread very carefully in the zone that it's going.
So this is actually, this is actually very fascinating, right? So if you're on the side of the farmers, you believe that this committee is a stillborn idea. If you're on the side of the government, you believe that the Supreme Court is overdoing it. So Radhika, this is exactly what you were saying, that this is actually not paving the way for a resolution. If you're making Chidambaram's argument, which Indra was reinforcing, that you've got to take this back to Parliament, as a political journalist, I don't see that happening. So basically, none of these solutions are working then.
None of this is working. And if we just go back to the land acquisition amendment, which you alluded to, The government kind of quietly put it on the back burner. Why? Because it was under pressure from the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. It was not about Rahul Gandhi's Soot Boot Ki Sarkar remark or about the opposition. It was dissent from within the Sangh Parivar. Now, we don't see that happening this time. The Bharatiya Kisan Sangh, which is the RSS's farmers' front, has not really said, apart from issuing some anodyne statements which are neither here nor there. So, I believe that pressure has to come from within, from either within the larger Sangh Parivar or the BJP. And there are signs of discontent. If you talk to BJP guys privately, they do tell you that ye sarkar ki chhabi pe asar hua hai, in a negative sense, not in a positive sense. And if at all the Prime Minister had to go on the reforms agenda, he should have not touched agriculture. That's the other point that they are making. Agriculture is too sensitive an issue impinging on the lives of crores and crores, and it should not have been touched at all. So I do believe some kind of a tipping point may come, either before the Uttar Pradesh election or before the Lok Sabha election, which may force the government to either put it in abeyance, the implementation, or bring in amendments.
But let's just hypothesize a little more. And Bhuvan, I'm coming to you right after that, and then Gurcharan on reforms. What if the Supreme Court does mandate this committee? In the next few hours, we have the committee, and the farmers continue to protest and say this is not good enough. What happens then? Because there could be, right now the farmers have an enormous amount of public support. People who do not understand the laws one way or the other do not want to see farmers out on the streets. There is and I want Avik also to just consider my question. There is a chance that if the Supreme Court insists on the committee and the farmers insist on their protest, there could be a danger of eroding public sympathy. Could there not, Radhika?
I really don't see how the committee can become a catalyzing issue, Barkha. It's there. There is a panel. It is there to buy time for the government primarily. And as Avik mentioned, that it's going to have 3 or more representatives who will reflect different points of view, unlikely to have a very strong meeting ground, but could also. But what is the mandate of the committee? This law has to go back to Parliament ultimately, or the government decides to put it on the back burner as it did with the land acquisition amendments. So one of the two has to happen before. If
so almost all of you, other than Arun Kumar, Gurcharan, and me, all of you believe that the expert committee is actually a no starter. Whereas I think both Arun and Gurcharan seem to believe that it could provide a compromise formula that could then be taken back to Parliament. I think that's where we're approaching this differently. Bhuvan, quickly, and then Gurcharan.
Okay, about the committee, once again, we don't know whether what court does and what kind of a committee comes up. But I would agree with the point that, of course, ultimately, whatever happens to the law will have to happen in the Parliament. I'll just make 2 quick points on this, which I think, if you set up a committee like this, they would, of course, both sides could look at it differently. One could look at it, if you're telling farmers, elderly women to go back, they could look at it and be suspicious about it. And even in the government or otherwise, people could look at it and say, what mandate does it have to overrule lawmakers or Parliament, which has kind of passed these laws? So probably the way I look at it as a citizen, there are certain issues the courts could reassert or look at even in these protests. If we look at them, talk about them, is whether the without really directly talking and getting into the gray areas of policy, are probably whether the states, when the farmers were making their way to Delhi or the outskirts of Delhi, used excessive force, whether excessive force was used, or whether the states tried to stop peaceful protesters from coming into the capital, whether they should have done that. So those are the issues probably the court can look at, because they talk about the rights of the citizens, talking about what exactly they can do, cannot do, and also.
So you're saying those are the issues the court can get into, but not the other issues.
Those are the issues probably everyone would agree, because that would set some sort of a.
Got it. Let me just bring in Gurcharan and then Indira on this. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want you all to suggest what you think should and can happen now within a constitutional framework of the division of roles. Gurcharan, you heard Radhika say that when it comes to economic reform, there's a growing groundswell within the BJP. In her reading as a senior journalist, that even if you want to reform, leave this sector alone. It's a political hot potato. It involves the lives of the poor. It involves grassroots politics. It involves state versus center politics. It's basically a minefield that the BJP has walked into, and nobody is quite clear why the year of the pandemic is the year that they should have chosen. What was the hurry? I mean, I think there's also that question, and yes, the BJP does practice a disruptive politics. Some could find it decisive, some could find it disruptive, depending on your point of view. What do you think?
Well, I was very sad to hear what Radhika said. I was very sad to hear what Radhika said. I really feel that this committee or whatever, even if it provides guidelines, it's obviously not something that they can override the government or legislate. But it can provide that face saver, it can provide a way to move forward. I really feel at why they had to do it. The reason perhaps is that, most countries do reforms in a crisis. And so to expect reforms to take place when everything is hunky-dory is to expect the impossible. And just as I was disappointed that we had to go back on the land laws, I would be hugely disappointed if BJP decided, well, reforms actually lose us votes, and so we're not going to do reforms. And so we may go well back into the days of the license Raj one day and say, well, markets don't work, and so we are consigning India to a statist kind of economy. And really, I mean, if one believes in what the benefits that have come to the country after 1991, you have to feel very, very sad that if we go back on to these agricultural reforms have been suggested by every committee for the last 25, 30 years. And whether it's Mr. Swaminathan or so many, people have said this is the right way to go. And it's like really politics finally trumping what is economic and what is good in India. And that is what makes me so very, very concerned and worried and sad.
Okay. Let me bring Indira in, because the economists, of course, are divided on the law, and that is the point that the farmers' unions have been making, that if you do set up this expert panel and it brings a cross-section of commentators and thinkers and public intellectuals, will we really have a solution, or will the conversation around the laws continue to be polarized? Now, in terms of let's as they say, war game this. Let's imagine that the Chief Justice does mandate a panel that is headed by a former retired judge, which seems to be the speculation. And the judge then appoints a set of experts. And the farmers say, this is not good enough. We have no faith in this. We want a parliamentary session. What happens then? And will the court then, Indira, do you think, continue to remain sympathetic, or could the court then also be harsher on the farmers in the way that it has been on the government?
Okay, so let me make a couple of things very clear. From the previous two hearings, my understanding is that despite a passionate request from Mr. Harish Salve that the stoppage of the protest should be a precondition to the hearing by the committee, the Chief Justice declined the invitation. He repeatedly made it clear that he is not going to stop any protest, committee or no committee. And he made it clear that even during the hearing of the committee, he is not saying the protest should be stopped. What he said is that is a call which any police force needs to take, namely, is there violence, is there no violence? So I think that's extremely creditable. And I would say it's a very neat understanding of the law. Secondly, let's assume that this committee is either boycotted or that there's no consensus in the committee. It is not going to be a catastrophe for any of us in court. It only means that the ball is back in the court of the Chief Justice or the Supreme Court of India, where they're going to have to decide on the legality and the constitutionality of the law. So if you ask me, the biggest favor that the Supreme Court could do for us is to decide on the constitutionalities of these laws as soon as possible. But like you say that you are a political journalist, I say I'm a legal journalist, and I can tell you when you've got 370 pending, when you've got CAA pending, when you've got Kashmir pending, I cannot see on the horizon that this issue is going to be decided in a hurry. So I would look forward to an order from the court which says, keep these laws in abeyance while dialogue happens.
Okay, the dialogue between who and who, Indira, just to clarify, the dialogue between who and who, not the expert panel. You're saying between, send it back to the government and the farmers.
It's a very important question. Let me tell you a comment which the Chief Justice made, which I picked up my ears. He said, why, if you had done your consultation, why have we seen so much rebellion by the states? So now here we have stakeholders who are not confined only to the farmers. You have the consumer. I am concerned that my right to food is going to be affected. You know, once you have the production and distribution chain in one set of hands, you cannot be sure whether you're going to get your food on the table. At least, okay, I might get my food on the table because I can afford to pay for it. But what about the PDF system? What about the minimum price? What about the below poverty line people? Will they get food on their table? I'm not so sure. So I would like Gurcharan to reconsider what he means by the expression reform. We are not agreed that this is a reform. I might say it's a big step backward when it comes to the BPL population of this country. But to focus on the courts, I think the courts are going to have to decide on the legality and constitutionalities of these laws.
Okay, Gurcharan, very brief interjection, and then Avik.
Yeah, very quickly. First of all, I don't think this MSP system is going to go away because you have 2 lakh ration shops to feed every week and every month. But having said that, I think this is a second-rate system. That a much better system to provide subsidy to the farmers is to give them cash transfers. I would recommend the Telangana model, which is going in that direction. That get out of this whole business of MSP, of APMC, of spoiling the soil of your country, of spoiling the prices and doing incalculable damage to the country because 1/3 of the crop is destroyed. I would say give money, give them even more money than the subsidies are, but get rid of all these subsidies and replace them with cash transfers. Now the government has a system in place for making that happen.
Okay, because you've raised a point of economics, before I come to Avik, I'll let Arun Kumar sort of respond to that, and then we'll close with Avik and Radhika because I've got literally 3 minutes left. Mr. Kumar, please.
So, what Gurcharan is saying is that, the markets can function, whereas the question is that agricultural markets are not like markets for textiles or for cars, where you produce every day and you sell every day. There are 86% farmers who are small and marginal farmers who cannot cope with the market. And when you introduce bigger players, they will not be able to cope with that at all. What contract would you sign between a small farmer and a corporate person? There'd be no implementation of the contract either. So it's a very unequal situation. Markets are always very unequal. And that's why farmers are saying that this unequal market cannot function unless, the MSP is there and unless the APMC continues to function. They're not saying that MSP is going to disappear tomorrow or the APMC is going to disappear tomorrow. They're saying it's the process where these things are going to disappear and they will work against us. Second point is that in case of car, you can have markup pricing where all costs are covered. Farmers don't get all costs covered, and that's why they want the MSP to be decided by the government, so that the MSP will cover their costs plus give them a profit. So that's the reason why agricultural markets are very different. That's why agricultural markets are interlinked markets. They're not free markets. They cannot be made free simply by saying produce market will be free, whereas credit market will not be free. Farmers depend on credit, So therefore, this is not going to work. But I agree with what Indra said. The committee will be set up to only give you some kind of suggestions, but it has to go to the parliament, no doubt about it. The states have to be consulted.
Can the Supreme Court, just quickly, I want to understand this on a point of law, and then Avik and Radhika, I really have to close, I'm actually out of time. Indra, very briefly, can the Supreme Court order the government to take this back to Parliament? or no? Would that be crossing its remit? Indira? Yeah.
If you're
I can't hear you. Yeah,
no,
now I
if
can.
you're asking me, it's very, very unlikely. It is not possible for the Supreme Court to mandate a session of Parliament. It is possible, however, for the committee to make a suggestion that, in our opinion, Parliament should be convened. But again, it will remain at the level of an opinion. It is surely a political issue. I mean, you said you're a political journalist. It is a political issue. The bottom line.
It is, exactly. It is.
Yes. It is the bottom line. But then you've got to allow, in a federal system, you've got to allow the states to also have their own politics. You can't say the center will decide for the whole country. You know, it's just not all.
Yeah.
You want a constitutional framework, and states have decided. That's why the Supreme Court called it a rebellion of the states. I mean, it's an expression which is highly unusual, you know.
Yeah, Avik, yeah, sorry, got that. Just very quickly, Avik, do you think the expert panel is a route to a compromise that would go back to Parliament, or it's a total non-starter?
Not at all. The farmers are still struggling with the Swaminathan committee. 15 years have passed. Its prime recommendation or price has not been implemented, and now the politicians across the spectrum have the gall to lie about it. Without implementing, they can say it's implemented because it's so confusing. So no committee business. PDS is attempted to be closed. Mukul Rohatgi told me in court that after 5 years, the law provides that we can charge at the cost of acquisition. We don't have to give it at 1 rupee, 3 rupee. He said this in court, in Supreme Court, in Madan Lokur's court. 1.5 lakh crore is the debt of FCI. They are trying to shut down PDS. It's written across the wall. We can all pontificate and pretend that it's the other way around. So, finally speaking, the farmers' organizations are extremely wary. Committee is not going to work. Farmers want the Supreme Court to stay these laws, if at all it wants to, and stay not implementation. These laws need to be repealed. The farmers' organizations are very clear on it. And if the Supreme Court can find a path to that repeal, excellent. Otherwise, the Supreme Court better stay away from it. That's kind of the position, but that's my personal position. I hope the farmers' organizations collectively decide this too.
Okay, Radhika, I can hear you listening with great intent, because I think what you're about to say is that this is probably going to be even trickier to resolve than even you thought.
Absolutely. I just think it's a long haul, Barkha, no easy solutions. And today I read somewhere about the experiences of apple growers in Himachal, who were sort of, when the corporate took over apple production, I mean, it was disastrous for the small traders who were selling apples, for the warehouses, and for the farmers ultimately. You know, they got good prices to start with, and they were ruined by the end of the whole thing. So I think, you know, there is no level playing field. And as the government, it's really up to the government to ensure that there are legal guarantees to keep the MSP and the APMC. And until that is done, farmers have every reason to be circumspect and protest the laws.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. I think the one thing this very sort of disparate set of very eminent voices can agree on is, in the end, there are only some places where it's a legal debate. This is about politics. You know, whether, even if you support the laws, even economists like Ashok Gulati have urged the Prime Minister to go and have langar with the farmers, and he's a votary of the laws. So even if you support the laws, it is in the end about a communication between government and its citizenry, and no law, no Chief Justice can actually provide you a formula for that compact between an elected government and the people of a country. And that's really, I think, where we have to bring the focus back. Leaving it there, Gurcharan Das, Arun Kumar, Bhuvan Baga, Indira Jaisingh, Avik, and Radhika. Thank you. A pleasure. Learned so much from all of you.